Hi everybody. Sorry about the delay. Before we get started, I want to let you know I won't be able to see your questions in live time. Kristen is going to copy and paste those to me. My chat box has disappeared, so until we find it, she'll go ahead and give me those questions as they come in. But I want to go ahead and get started. So tonight we're going to talk about using switches and other assistive technology in the classroom. So I'm going to start with this slide, and some of you may have been here a couple weeks ago when I talked about leisure skills and why they're so important. So I just want to kind of go over that one more time, and then we'll get started with switches. So individuals with multiple disabilities are often entertained. So leisure activities are done to them as they watch rather than them getting to engage in them independently. As children, they're often not able to explore their environment, so they can't always pick their own toys. They don't get to crawl around the house and choose what things they want to play with, even if they're not things that we necessarily want them to play with. But it's harder for them to explore their environment. So we want to give them as many opportunities as possible to control what's around them, pick their own choices, or pick their own activities, pick anything that they want to do. So tonight we're going to talk about incorporating switches to give them that opportunity. So something that before I get started, I kind of want to talk about is why we focus on the switch skills. So I know when I started teaching multiple disabilities, everybody was using switches. So I taught my students to use switches, and we could turn lights on and off, and we could make all the little stuffed animals play, and that was fun. But I didn't really have that clear picture of why I was teaching them to use the switches, like what was my long-term goal, what were they going to be doing as adults that made the switches so important. Because a lot of times we just focus on getting them to do the cause and effect or getting them to just play and interact, and we want to keep a focus on where we're going as an adult so that we can start practicing those skills. So I'm going to kind of touch on some of the bigger things that someone would use in leisure activities and in their home as an adult to kind of keep that in the back of our mind as we talk about some of the fun activities and ways to teach and use the switches. So something that a lot of you may be familiar with, and if you're completely new to switches, this is basically the concept behind everything you need for using switches. Environmental control units are also called ECUs. These allow your individual to use the switch to control the electronics, the lights, any type of powered equipment in their environment. So there's 4 different types. AC power is the one that's pictured here. This is a newer version. Some of you may still have the old power link that just has 2 outlets on the top. So anything that you can plug in your house into an outlet can be plugged into the ECU with the AC power, and then you can run it by a switch. The infrared uses a signal that sends to a control unit, and then that extends the signal to an appliance. So whatever you're using has to be pointed at the control unit without any obstruction. So you need to be in a straight line view from where you're using the switch to the thing that you want to turn on and off. And when I say appliance, that can mean a light, that can mean a fan, that can mean anything that's running by power. So not really talking about your refrigerator, but I'll just kind of use the word appliance as I talk. Radio control switches, it sends a radio wave. It's kind of like your garage door controller. So that sends a signal to your appliance from the control unit. It works in different rooms. Generally 50 to 100 feet is the maximum range. You can use multiple units, but sometimes the signals will interfere with each other, so you have to be careful, especially in a classroom if you have 5 or 6 students using them, that they're not interfering with each other's signal and controlling the wrong object. And then ultrasound uses high frequency sound waves to reach the control unit. So the switch and the control unit need to be in the same room, but they don't have to be in a straight line or within eye view of each other. So I gave you a link here just to the AbleNet Power link so you can see the basic one. And then there's lots of information. There's manuals and things on that website link so that you can get some more information about it. And before I go in past this, most of the ECUs have different modes of control. So the basic ones are direct, which means that if you set it at direct and you hold the switch down, the item that you're controlling operates the whole time the switch is held down. As soon as you let go of the switch, then the device stops working. There's usually a timed option, either in seconds or minutes, or usually both. So if it's in seconds, you can run the appliance from anywhere from 1 to 99 seconds usually that you set it. So if you want someone to turn something on and it operate for 35 seconds, you would program it to 35 and it'll run. So when they hit the switch, it'll then run for 35 seconds. And then there's a timed that goes from 1 to 99 minutes. That one you may use maybe for music or something else that you want to turn off after a while. And then there's usually a latch feature, which means that the first time you press the switch, it turns the item on. And then the second time you press the switch, it will turn it off. So kind of like a light switch. You turn it on and then you turn it off. So that's usually the function we want to get to after we teach them to use switches. So when I said that I want to kind of keep that big picture in the back of your mind of where are we going when we're teaching our kids to use switches, these are some of the options and some of the items that are out there for using in your home. So the AbleNet Primo touchscreen ECU runs with infrared. It has a touchscreen or a switch access with scanning. So this can control your TV, all of your electronics. It even will operate a computer, your AAC devices or communication devices. It can work as a phone. With add-on accessories, you can also control things like a door. You can open and shut the curtains, page somebody for help in an emergency situation. So this is kind of the big one. It'll control pretty much everything in the environment. And so if you have someone as an adult or even as a child that they're in their wheelchair without much movement, they can operate this to control everything around them and still have access to those items in their home. The AbleNet Pilot is a voice-activated ECU. It activates by speech. I think it said it had like 96 maybe different commands that it can use. It can also operate with a single switch or on scanning, so that if someone just has access from scanning and maybe doesn't have speech control, it has that option to operate through the switch. It has a built-in microphone, or you can use your own microphone if somebody is already using some type of speech-to-text situation. Then they can just use it to operate this. Also has external keys that you can use for someone to program it, or if the person is able to use that sometimes, they could use the external keys. And it basically runs for infrared for electrical control or electronics, but it also will run on radio control for operating your other appliances like lights and fans and things in the environment. The AbleNet Insteon kit, this goes with the Apple Smart Home control so that you can run everything in your house with your iPhone or your iPad. So the Insteon kit is, AbleNet has it. You can buy it from other places as well, but it allows you to convert your outlets and different things to the Insteon, so everything that's plugged into that can be controlled and powered from your smartphone. And then the last one I listed there is the enabling devices. This is the sensory zone controller. And this one I really like. In the picture it's the blue one that kind of looks like the Cheap Talk 8 from enabling devices. And it's a good first device for controlling home. So it will control up to 4 appliances, and they come with little things that plug into your outlet, and you hook your appliance into that. And then the top row of buttons turn those items on, and the bottom row will turn it off. So you have an on for the light switch and then an off for the light switch. I think in the picture it has a blender, so you can turn it on, you can turn it off. And so it's a really good introduction for little kids to start learning that they can control their environment. You can use it in the classroom and then build up to some of those bigger systems once they get the concept of what they're doing. There's also a Talk 8 appliance control that looks pretty much the same, but it has the feature of recording a message on each one. So the light on button can say light on and light off so that they get that feedback. Or if they have visual impairments, it will allow them to hear what it is that they're accessing on the buttons. So those are just kind of things that we want to keep in the back of our mind. This is where we're going. These are why we're teaching people to have switch skills, so that they're able to operate these types of things independently as adults. And so battery interrupters are kind of the thing you have to use switches for anything that doesn't plug in. So we use these a lot, especially with toys. They're good for toys and items that do one thing, so that it sings or it makes music. It's a little more tricky when it has several features. So if an animal dances and spins and sings, you have to have a switch for each separate thing. So it's better if you have just one feature that the toy is going to do, especially if you're a beginning user and don't know how to adapt everything. After you've been doing it for a while, you get better and better at figuring out how to make all of them work. So I've given you just a link to buying battery interrupters. You can buy them from lots of different places. I usually buy twice as many of the AA, AAA size as I do for the C and D interrupters. Most things that you're going to control run off of AA batteries, but they're also a smaller size, and so it's easier to break. It's better if you're rotating them so they're not getting used quite as often. The wire usually gets shut inside of a battery door, so that wears down the wires quickly, so it's nice to have those on hand. And you just don't use the C and D as much, and they're bigger, so they're a little bit stronger wire. I've given you some links to making your own battery interrupters. A good place to find the materials for that is Radio Shack. Also, when you're using any of the battery interrupters, whether you make your own or you buy them, if you wrap some electrical tape around the wire right where the battery door is going to hit, like on the toy, that helps make it last a little bit longer so that it doesn't wear down the wire. Sometimes the battery doors will not shut over the wire, so you may have to make your own battery door. Usually just something as simple as cutting out a piece of cardboard and putting some duct tape over it will keep the batteries in place so that you can use the battery interrupter there. The first link I gave you there from the Instructables, if you're not familiar with Instructables, this website is fantastic for everything assistive technology. There's a DIY version of pretty much everything. So if you get into this website and start exploring, you're going to want to make everything that you find. But I gave you a link for the one that's without soldering. These are much easier to make and really good for beginners, but they do fall apart more easily. So you may want to make the CD size first instead of the AA's and ones that won't be used as much, and just until you get some practice. The practical AAC one is a link to a similar video of how to do the first one. And then the SMA support website gives the method to do it with soldering. And so I've burned my fingers many, many times, but this is the way to make the best battery interrupters. So I gave you that link. And then the one right below it from AT Access is a printable version of how to do it, so that maybe if you print it out and hand it out to parents or to people that are new to making battery interrupters and want to be involved with it, this is a great link to share. Also, when I was teaching severe disabilities, I was able sometimes to get the shop class. The students thought it was really cool that they could make these, and so I could give them printouts of how to do it, and their class would make them for my students. And so it was a great way for them to interact, but it also meant that I didn't have to make as many battery interrupters. So that might be a great PDF to supply to them. If you're hardwiring a battery interrupter, this is more for those toys where you have to squeeze the paw on a stuffed animal or you have to squeeze its belly to make it sing. Those are harder to adapt, so you may have to hardwire those. So I've given you a couple of links for hardwiring. If you have no experience with using battery interrupters and making a lot of these, I would start with just making your own battery interrupters and using the more simple toys, and then work up to hardwiring, especially if you're not comfortable with using wires and different tools, and then work up to that. It is easy to do once you're used to working with the wires and soldering things, but it is a little tricky when you first get started. So I gave you a couple of links. The first one is a great just hands-on, step-by-step how to do it. The second one, the Let's Play Project PDF, has tons of info on adapting the toys, but also some great overviews of switches, how to choose toys to use with the switches, different ways to mount your switch, how to use it and play. So it's a fantastic handout that I would print and hand out to parents that are new to this, or if you're a parent and you have a teacher that isn't as familiar with using these things, this is a great just where to get started type of handout. Okay, and there's some different types of switches, so I just want to touch on these a little bit before I go into some activities. So a pressure switch is the basic switch that you see the most, like the Big Red, the Jelly Bean are typical examples. There's a pillow switch, which is a padded version. It kind of has like a zipper that goes around it. I've had to use that with students that maybe hit the switch really, really hard, maybe knock the switch off the wheelchair tray a lot on accident, so the padded switch is a better version for them to protect the switch. A string switch is also a type of pressure because you're pulling on it. Some of my students have voluntary movement where they do better. They can pull, they can move their arm, but they don't do as well maybe reaching out and trying to hit a switch. So a string switch is a great way for them to have success with a beginning switch that you can wrap the string around their hand, and then all they have to do is move their arm up and down. They don't have to hit the target and reach out and have to do 2 or 3 different skills in order to be successful. Also there's a lever switch, which is kind of like it's just a little stick that goes back and forth, and when it's pushed on or pulled the other direction, it activates whatever is attached to the switch. So I had a student once that really was capable of pushing his own wheelchair, but he was also very capable of sitting in the chair and acting like a king and wanting us to push him. So we attached a radio to the back of his wheelchair, and I hooked it up to a lever switch that was fastened inside of his wheelchair wheel. And the only way that he could play his music was if he made his wheelchair wheels move. And so that got him to go down the hallway and push his own wheelchair, and got him doing that because the switch would activate the music. As soon as his wheels would stop moving on his wheelchair, then his music would stop playing. So there's lots of different ways that you can use the switch. That one was kind of bribery and torture, but it worked, and it also taught him how to use the switch better and to get his music. So There's also jelly beamers, which are a wireless pressure switch. The receiver attaches to the appliance, and the switch activates in the room up to 30 feet away. And the jelly beamers can be used with multiple people using them in the same room, so they don't interfere with each other's signal. If one student's playing with one toy, another student can be using a jelly beamer across the room and playing with a different toy, and they'll be okay together. Another one is touch-sensitive switches. These are sometimes called plate switches. You may hear them called low profile. A common one is the PAL pad or the microlight switch. These are for someone that needs to just barely touch the switch to activate it if they have very low muscle tone. Or I had a student that was more excited about the noise that the switch would make rather than what she was doing with the switch. So using a touch-sensitive plate switch meant that there was no auditory feedback. So you're just touching the pad and nothing happens. So they don't get that auditory feedback. They don't get an up and down movement. The switch is just activated by the touch. So some students need that so that they're not focusing on the noise that they make with the switch. Air pressure switches are the pneumatic grip switch that you squeeze and release to activate, or a sip and puff where they just suck in and blow into a switch. A lot of people use these more with power chairs. You'll see them ran with a sip and puff switch. So air pressure ones are more of a specialty switch, but I just wanted you to be aware of those. Muscle sensor, these are switches that respond to little tiny voluntary movements in your finger, or they may hook it to the eyebrow or to the cheek. They usually tape on in some fashion. A really common one is called the twitch switch, is one that you'll hear about, or if you are Googling just to find more information, that's a good one to start with. Infrared switches and proximity switches. Infrared, there's a beam kind of that comes out of the switch, and whenever the person moves in front of that beam, it activates the switch. So they don't have to actually hit the switch. They just have any type of movement, even a blink can make the switch activate. So a small one that can be mounted on their eyeglasses, or that can be mounted on the side of a wheelchair and point at the eye, someone can blink and be able to activate everything in their house with that switch. Proximity switches are a type of that it senses movement coming near the switch. So if you have someone that maybe can reach out, or they have a movement that's consistent but they can't always get to the switch consistently, a proximity switch is one where it just needs to be near the switch to activate it. So those are good for students that maybe are spastic or they get excited, and so they can almost get there but not quite activate the switch. And then sound activated switches, any sound in the environment or a specific volume will activate it. These are great for speech therapists to use when you've got students that you're trying to get to vocalize, or even if you're just trying to increase volume with a student, you can adjust the sensitivity for how loud they have to be to activate something that they want, or a light show or something that is attached to it, just to work on volume. And so you can make some of your own DIY switches. I gave an example here. The Oklahoma Assistive Technology Center turned those cheap closet tap lights that run by battery power into switches. So I gave you a link for how they did that if you want to make your own, because sometimes buying all the switches get pretty expensive for the home or for the classroom. My brother made Staples easy buttons into switches for my classroom because they looked more age appropriate in a high school classroom. Some of them still said that was easy. Some of them he turned off the sound, but it was followed this exact same steps that they used for the tap lights. And so then you can turn different things. I think there's a few online if you go into YouTube or the Instructables website of how to make them out of CDs. So there's ways to make your own if you're feeling very creative. And there are also lots of novelty and DIY switches. So if you look at places like enabling devices, there are pages and pages of novelty switches that will interest your student. One thing to think about is to be really careful when you use the novelty switches that you aren't making the switch the focus of the activity. So here I gave you a picture of one. There's a lot of things going on there, and so you want to make sure that the student is realizing that they're activating the switch and that they're not just playing with a toy, and that the whole purpose isn't that you're trying to get them to hit the switch. The switch should serve as the same purpose as a light switch does for you. So you want it to turn things on, you want it to turn things off. So sometimes we go a little overboard with the novelty of thinking, oh, that's really cool, it's made out of Legos, oh, it's made out of koosh balls, and my student's going to love that. And we lose focus of, are we wanting them to play with the switch, or are we wanting the switch to activate something that's really exciting in their environment, which is our long-term goal. The ones like in this picture are really great for those students who are still working at that basic cause and effect level. You're still trying to make sure that they've got it. I touch something, something happens, because that is the basis for being able to use switches. So these novelty switches where everything is right there are great for those students because when they touch something, it happens right there in the exact same place they touched. So when they activate this switch, it's going to light up, it's going to make noise. So these are fantastic for those students. This type of switch is not fantastic for someone that just needs to turn on the TV or needs to turn on a light switch somewhere. So we just have to keep our focus in the right place. So AbleNet switches, I gave you a link to all of their switches. They also have a great switch guide that's available at that same link that will just kind of give you different features of all of their different switches, what they would be used for. AbleNet has more of the switches you're going to use for everyday access to things. Enabling devices, I gave you a link there. They have a lot of the same switches, but they also have the switches that are going to be working more on that cause and effect with all the bells and whistles. But those are the ones we want to pull away from as our student gets older. If someone's been using switches for 15 years, they shouldn't still be at the same level of needing to have it light up and do things. So just something to keep in mind as you're picking out switches for students. Okay, so now let's talk about some activities and have a little fun. So basic fun is just things you would do with just one person. So these are things they're going to do independently that we want them to be able to have fun and control it all by themselves. So AbleNet has some great Switch accessible toys. I gave you a link there. This is where you're going to see those stuffed animals. You're going to see the singing toys, race cars, those kind of things, enabling devices. Many other companies have them as well. These come already ready to plug into your Switch. So it's basically the same thing as what I gave earlier of teaching you how to make something Switch accessible. They've already done it for you. So then you don't have to do all of the work. There are tons of toys out there. There's lots of games. There's arts and crafts things with the spin arts. Lots of different things that they can choose from. So my suggestion is to look at these catalogs, look at these websites, and just see what things they're adapting, and then look at what you already have and what would be easily adaptable for you. The other thing to focus on is that we're not trying to get the student to just activate a switch. Again, the point of buying these toys isn't that you just want them to hit the switch to make something happen. Look at the toys your child or your student is already interested in. What is it they constantly want you to activate? What are they constantly trying to play with? That's the thing that you want to make Switch accessible. So these toys give us an introduction to that. They have never seen before that when they do something, they can make an animal light up and do it on their own. So that's what we're giving them the power to do with the switches. The goal is not that we're just having them hit the switch to make something move. We want them to want something to move, and then the switch is their way of doing it. Okay? So a couple of other things that Bob Asigi pointed out to me and reminded me to put in here are the Skoog Music and Beams Interactive Music. These are fantastic tools. I gave you some links there. Skoog Music is the box that's pictured up there at the top right. And each of those little, looks like buttons, but they're kind of squishy, can be set to sound like a different instrument, a different sound, a different anything. And so the students just have to touch them, and they can play an entire orchestra. They can make any kind of sound effect. They can participate in their school band, and you can set it to play clarinet, and each one plays a different note so that they're able to, just by touching, do things that other students are doing with music. And it's really fun to interact with. If you've never seen one, I definitely would encourage you to go to the website and check out some of the YouTube videos, but they're also at a lot of assistive technology conferences, disability expos, so if you have the chance to play with one, they're very, very neat. The Beams Interactive Music is another one that's pictured there, the second picture down with the little boy. All they have to do is put their hand between the two beams, and it interrupts the laser beam, and that plays the music. So there are tons of activities. There's music that's downloaded and ready already to use. You can make your own activities. You can set your own sounds. This is a fantastic tool for a group or for a child to play with on their own, to make their own music and have control over that. And this is a good one for someone that doesn't have a lot of movement of their body. So you can set that beam all the way down to somebody's eyelash so that when they blink, it activates the music. You can program it, set it, mount it in any way that you need to make it work for any user. So this is a great way for students to make music that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have access to that. And then a link there to the bubble machine and just basic toys that they're going to want to play with. And bubble machines are fun no matter what your age is. So those are things that are easily Switch accessible. This one is already made to be Switch accessible, but you can also do it yourself. So just want to give you some ideas there. So now let's talk a little bit about switching up the fun as a group. So these are some group activities. One that I like is the photography. I've given you a link here to a YouTube video on making your iPad or your iPhone work with the switch so that you can use it to take photos or make videos. Another really, really good one is RJ Cooper has a switch adapted camera. I've used that one in my classroom before and my students loved it. So they can take photos, you can add things to their communication device and they can make their own photos. They can create a book of a field trip, of things they do every day at school, and it goes right into that digital camera, and then you can put it into an iPad app and make a social story, or you can print it out for parents, or the parents can just flip through the digital camera at the end of the day and see what their kid did at school. Especially with our students that are nonverbal, they go home and their parents have to have some basis of where to even start when you ask them what they did at school that day. If they don't already know the answer, it's really hard to help them guide them through a communication device or talk to them when they aren't using the device yet. So giving them those pictures and allowing the student to activate it and take the pictures at their choosing during the day is really, really motivating for students. Some of the older ones, maybe like making a TV show, they can make their own news show. You can have a reality TV show live from your classroom. So the switch adapted cameras, you could adapt your own. I would look at some of the ones on the RJ Cooper website. He shows you how he adapted it. So it would be possible to make your own or try them from different lending libraries in your state. And at the end I'll give you links for that as well. Another fun thing to do with switches is cooking. I've given you just a link there for making your own switch activated pouring or measuring cup. You can buy those already made as well. Something that we do in my classroom, they can run the mixer, they can run the blender. There's stirring devices that you can buy online that they can run with a switch. I had a student that several of my students were tube fed, and so I would have them put their food in the blender and run it with the switch and do their food processing themselves before lunch every day. And I had a student whose entire goal in life was for me to forget to put the lid on that blender and him hit the switch at the right time and shoot SpaghettiOs all over our classroom. And he succeeded on enough occasions that it kept him motivated to grind SpaghettiOs every single day. But things like that can actually be fun too to get them motivated. So if you're cooking at home, prepare for the mess. But when they're running the switch, accidentally forget to put the lid on for a second. Let it shoot up. Let them see the result of what they're doing. Giggle about it because everybody once in their life will forget to put the blender lid back on fast enough. So let them make those mistakes they don't normally get to make because they don't have control over things. Another fun one is racing switch operated toys. So when we look at those stuffed animals and those cars and the things that I showed on the slide before this and enabling devices or AbleNet, take those and race them between students. This works a little bit better if you use wireless switches, but if they're not going very far, it's okay to keep them close and use wired switches. So the students can race, they can knock things down, have one student build things up with blocks, and then have the student that's using a switch use their walking toy to knock the things down and interact with each other. Another one is racing remote control cars. I gave you a link there to a switch adapted race car. I've used that one in my classroom several times from a lending library. It's very durable. My students loved it, so that one's a fun one to use. Target also has a new baby race car that's in their baby toy section that has one button. It's very easy to use, and so you hit the button and it goes forward. The next time they hit the button it spins in a circle. Next time you hit the button it goes backwards. It lights up, it plays music, and my students have loved it, and I didn't have to adapt it to be switch accessible because it was already set with the remote control with one button. It doesn't look so much like a baby toy. It's a little bit smaller than a normal remote control car, but my students really, really enjoyed that one. Also, you can use a blow dryer mounted on a switch mounting system and use a blow dryer to play air hockey. So they're going to run the blow dryer with the switch, turn it on and off. They can steer it if they have that capability on the mounting system. You can race ping pong balls with using the blow dryer or using a fan. They can do ball painting where you put a ping pong ball inside of a box, put some paint in there, and then use the blow dryer to blow the ping pong ball around, and it smears and makes paint and lots of fun little things that they can do and make a giant mess. But students love doing that because they can blow the painted ball all over the place in the box. So those are just easy, fun things to do with the switches and the blow dryers. So another one is using a switch activated massager. So you can buy just a basic massager type of thing off of the shelf, or you can buy one. I think I've given you a link there of one that's already adapted for a switch. Put it on someone's chair, and then when the teacher walks in the room and gets ready to sit down, they can hit their switch and scare their teacher. You can put it underneath a piece of metal or something else in the classroom, so it will make scary sounds when somebody comes close. And my students used to like it just to activate it on their chair, or when they're in the stander, in the gate trainer, on the bed or on the mat, that they have that ability to turn it on and off and make that choice of whether they want it. Some of them heat up, so if it's somebody that's safe to have a heated vibrating thing, and you want to check, because if they have some sensory issues, you want to make sure that they can feel if it's getting too warm to be able to turn that on and off. But those are things that we get to make that decision, that we want to sit with a massager, or we want our feet on a massager, or we want a heating pad. And so it's nice to be able to give them that choice and teach them how to do that with the Switch so that they have that capability later as adults. Another fun one is running the red and green light in the classrooms. If you buy a red light and you buy a green light, they can use two different switches. In gym class, they can decide when the students run fast, when the students run slow. You can play freeze with it. They can control how fast the class walks down the hallway. So giving them that control of the other students interacting with them and listening to what they're doing. Operating lights for a haunted house, for a ball game, for a pep rally at the high school level, even for a school play. They have the ability to do those things if they're operated with a switch. So that lets them be included in those activities. Another fun one is racing boats on water. So you can start it as simple as just a little wash tub full of water in the classroom with a little plastic boat. Use a switch activated fan and they can race it. Then you can work up to bigger things, and if you want to have a regatta in your school with a fan, then they have that ability to do that. Also controlling the music for a class or for group activities. My students used to love doing power chair races, or when I put them in their gate trainers, I would let them run the red and green light and they would race each other, or they would control who got to go where. And those are great ways to get them motivated to be in the gate trainer or to be learning how to use a power chair as well. Last, if you were part of my last webinar, I talked about using flashlights with students. They love using the flashlight, and we mount it on the wheelchair and they can control it, they can point to things with it, they can try to tag each other. So again, if you put it on a switch, that gives them the ability to turn it on and off and play flashlight tag with each other, or to just light up a room and then pick different things and turn it on and off. So you're giving them even more control over that fun activity. Another great one, especially if you've got a student that's in a full inclusion room, if they're interacting with peers, my students love being in charge of the electric pencil sharpener, because they can make that sucker make noise even if there's not a pencil in it. But they also get the other peers to acknowledge them and interact with them. So if they're running the power for the pencil sharpener and they turn it off while someone's trying to sharpen their pencil, the first thing that person does is look over at them, make eye contact, and say, "Hey, you turned off my pencil sharpener." And then they laugh, and then they interact with each other, and it's a great start. So that's a great job for them to have. And you can let other students control it as well. But it gives them that first interaction of just that person has a sense of humor. They're turning it on enough, and then I start to sharpen again, and they turn it off again. So it's just a fun way for them to be included in lots of different activities with their peers. And then it can also be a job for them if they're working in just learning pre-vocational things of operating the pencil sharpener. If one person is in charge of sharpening pencils, another person can be in charge of running the switch that operates the pencil sharpener. Controlling the operation game. This is a really fun one to do with a group. So obviously the operation game doesn't buzz until you touch it on accident when you're trying to remove the body part. But if someone's running that with a switch, they can get bribes from the other students to make it not buzz when they accidentally touch. This is a really good way to get students to interact with each other. Students will offer to do pretty much anything if they can get their peer to not push the button and make it buzz during their turn so that they win. So this is just a fun, I'm all about cheating if it gets them interacting with each other. So basically you're just going to put this on a switch and then allow your students to cheat a lot, but they're going to interact. So there's a good end game there. They can also activate a loser sound or a buzz sound effect when you play class games or review games. So when someone gets a wrong answer, they're in charge of pushing the sound effect that does the buzz that makes everybody know that they got it wrong. Vacuuming is something that can easily be hooked up to a switch. My students love vacuuming, which is kind of funny, but they'd never done it before, so to them it was a really exciting thing to do. And even better was if they controlled the switch while someone else vacuumed, and then they would keep yelling because every time they'd get going, they'd turn off the switch and the vacuum would turn off. So that's a fun one to do at home and get mom interacting with you. If you turn that switch off, mom's going to turn around and say, "Hey, turn my vacuum back on." And then they turn it on and they giggle and they interact, and it's just a fun way for them to realize how much control they have over something. And then you can teach them later how to run a chair and run the vacuum at the same time. So it just kind of builds from there. So once you are a little more used to building your own switches, adapting your own things, and you've mastered soldering battery interrupters, then you're ready for the more experienced switcher things. So here's some links for Nerf guns. There's 2 different links there for someone that made Nerf guns switch accessible, which is just so much fun for high school kids and for any boy pretty much. My students love shooting each other with Nerf guns after I was able to do this, so I highly recommend this one. There's probably a lot of other links and different ways to do it available online, but I just gave you 2 to get started. RJ Cooper has a Guitar Hero that is switch accessible so that the students can play. There's also a YouTube link here for making a leaf blower switch accessible. So if you go to the link, there's a couple of different links attached to it. This first one is just how to make a traditional leaf blower switch accessible. They also have a link on how to mount it to a wheelchair. So it was actually for an adult that was just wanting to use a leaf blower at his house and he was in a wheelchair. And needed a switch. But then they also have some links of how to play air hockey with it. So they can actually go outside and interact with each other, and somebody else has another leaf blower and they're running theirs off the switch and are able to play the air hockey and blow things around with the leaf blower. So those are some of the more high-tech adaptations to just traditional things that you would use in leisure. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of resources as we wrap up here. The Switch Progression Roadmap. This is a definite must-have for anyone that's using switches. Even if you've been using switches for a really long time, this is just a good thing to go back through, review, take a peek at of things that you just forgot you should have been doing. And sometimes we just lose focus of where we're going with the skills. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else that there's a lot of times I'm just, oh, I thought you're going to love this activity. I'm going to teach them how to do this with the switch. And I forget that I'm teaching them to do something with the switch because I have an end goal. So the switch progression kind of gives you the steps of how to make that a good process, what kind of things you want to see, what skills you're looking for, where to go with that. Pinterest, again, is a great place for finding ideas. You can search for just lots of leisure activities, search for switch accessible activities, and there's just lots of different boards that have things linked there. I gave you a link to mine. I have some things pinned on several different boards, but just to get you started on searching. Kate Ahern's website, Teaching Learners with Multiple Special Needs, is a website that every person that works with someone with multiple disabilities needs to have bookmarked on their internet browser. This is fantastic. She has tons of activities for using switches, lots of resources for using switches with iPads, with computer software, adapting things, making your own switch accessible toys. Pretty much if it can be done with a switch, Kate has something about it on her website, so I highly recommend that. The Scenic software from Ian Bean, I call Ian, I think I actually see him participating over there. I call him the king of all things switches. He has fantastic software that's available for free. He's created a lot of the switch software that is available online or that you purchase to use with computers. So this one, definitely lots and lots of things that you want to look at for using switches on his website. The AT Access has a We Can Play booklet that just has tons of information of kind of things that we want to look toward for including individuals in the community, why we're using the switches, how we can include these students using switches in play activities with other individuals who are not in a wheelchair, who don't need switches, even if they have disabilities or don't. But it just gives you a good focus of just different ideas of things and ways to help them learn to play instead of us doing things for them. We want them to be able to explore on their own. So this is just a great starting point for looking at ideas. I Help Innovations, I know Bob is participating. His website is absolutely fantastic. I actually met him on Twitter after my last webinar and have been picking his brain ever since. He is amazing with knowledge about eye gaze technology. Everything out there related to eye gaze I've been able to pick his brain about. So definitely check out his website. He also has a Twitter handle at I Help Innovation and a Facebook page. So I told him that I was going to give his name and prepare to be inundated by questions. So he's definitely someone to reach out to if you need a person that just knows more about some of the other stuff that's out there that you may not be using every day or aren't quite sure about. On the Instructables website I talked about a little bit earlier, this is a website you can just get lost forever. There's so much DIY stuff here. And so it's a really good place to look. If you think that there's something you want to maybe make Switch accessible, look here and see if somebody's already done it and has posted an instruction manual. Look through websites and catalogs like AbleNet, Enabling Devices, Don Johnston, SNS Therapy. All of these are great ways to find ideas of things that you already have and could adapt, things that you could easily make or use. But remember that our end goal is that they're going to be able to use it for life, or we're giving them skills that they're going to be able to use for life. So the goal is not what can I do with a Switch because I have one. It's where is this going to go, or what toy can they play with if I do give them a Switch? What will this enable them to do independently that they want to do that they couldn't do already without that Switch? So those are the things we want to look at in those catalogs and find, rather than just focusing on, oh, this looks really cool and it works on the Switch, I'm going to buy it, without that end goal in mind. Also, I've given you a link to the assistive technology lending libraries. So for those of you in the United States, each state has a lending library for assistive technology that you can try out different equipment, just sample it. Some of them are limited to schools, so the teachers would need to do it. Otherwise, a lot of them the parents can check them out. So you're responsible if you damage it, but otherwise it's usually a free, aside from shipping it back, for you to try out the different technology. I know that there are additional lending libraries besides what's in this list, but I just wanted to kind of give you a place to get started, that those things are out there. You don't have to buy everything for the first time just to try something out. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew about those resources. And finally, if anybody has any questions, we'll go ahead and take questions here, but then also feel free to contact me. You can email me, send me a tweet on Twitter. I've also given you a link to my website. I have lots of resources listed for Switch accessible websites, games, things like that that are on there, and resources for finding other things related to using Switches. So if you have any questions and you want to put those in the chat box, again, I can't see the chat box, so Kristen is going to copy and paste those to me so that I can answer some questions here. And as those come in, thank you again for participating this week. And I look forward to seeing some of the questions here. If I don't have any questions, that'll be a first, but that could be exciting. Maybe I covered every single thing possible with Switches, but I doubt it. If you have additional questions and you want to email them to me, I don't know if maybe other people's chat boxes aren't working too, could possibly be it. Please feel free to email those or send anything on Twitter. And thank you guys for attending. I see some of you probably are going to start signing out, so I appreciate it. Hope some of you will join me again next week. We're going to talk about using AAC and communication devices in leisure activities and working for long-term goals for that as well. Someone asked if I have any tips for managing all the wires. Usually I try to not use the wired switches with toys and things that are that flip and do things where it's going to get tangled. They do have wireless switches now, which are great for those of us that have been doing this for a really long time. That's like the greatest invention ever. I used to tape switches down. I would tape them to the table so that they didn't fall as easily, so wires didn't get tangled up. You can wrap Velcro around them just to kind of keep them organized, especially when you're storing them. But usually I would use electrical tape to try and keep things under control, hooking things together, fastening things to wheelchairs, also Velcroing them down. If you have a place where you're always mounting a switch on a wheelchair, you can put Velcro on the wheelchair and then just fasten the switch down with the Velcro and hold all the wires that way, so you're not constantly having to use tape and get sticky residue all over a wheelchair. If you have any more questions. Okay. I'm not seeing any more. We'll see if Kristen posts any. Kristen will email you tomorrow with any of the slides and additional information, or so that you can view this again or share it with others. Looks like there's one more question. Any tips or sites for teaching switches with vision impairment? A lot of the switch sites that I gave you links to have information on the vision impairment. So those are really good ones to look at. Basically, you're doing it the same way. You're working on that cause and effect. It's more you're going to focus on that the switch is always going to be in the same place, and it's really thinking about what it is you're controlling with the switch. So it's a lot harder to find things that they're going to respond to. So you're not going to be turning lights on and off so much because they're not going to be able to see it. So working on the cause and effect is usually the hardest part. But once they get that, it's usually you're teaching it about the same way because they're controlling things in their environment that they want access to, or that they want something to happen. And so by giving them the ability to do that with the switch, that's the encouragement that they need to use it. So really, once you get past the teaching the cause and effect with the vision impairment, basically just making sure you're mounting switches and making them available to them in the same location so that they know where to look or where to go.